Okay, so what we're going to talk about now is we're going to talk about working with settings inside of Avid Media Composer and some of the settings you can adjust and all the different types of settings and how they work. And I'm going to go through some of the settings that I personally like. But before we do that, I'm going to hit Command-Shift-W because I want to get out of this project. So I'm going to go here into File, Close Project, or Command-Shift-W, and I'm going to hop out of this project. And we're going to go to the Select a Project Welcome introductory screen. In the top of this, you'll see that it says the location of the project, as we've always seen. And then up above this, it says user profile. And here under the user profile, it says Chad. And so this is the default user profile that I've been working with on this computer. That's me, Chad, that's my user profile. But for now, just for play, we're going to go here to user profile. And I'm going to go to this little pull down and say create a user profile, a new user profile. And we'll call this new guy, new guy here. New guy. So this is my new user profile called new guy, and I'm going to say okay. And that's going to change a little bit about the way my screen looks. It's going to look much darker. It's going to go to the default settings that exist inside of Avid, and this is all the defaults, which I don't necessarily like, but we're going to do them anyway. And we're going to go back into this project and open this up. So the settings file, you can get settings files, you can get certain settings from different places, and even in some of the fast menus, they have some of the settings, etc. But here in Avid Media Composer, if you're on a PC, you can go to File, Settings, and that is the shortcut Command-Shift equal or Control-Shift equal on a PC per se. On a Mac system, you can go just into Avid Media Composer Preferences, which is Command, which is basically the same thing. But either way, File, Command-Shift equal or Control-Shift equal, or Command, you can go into the settings, and this will open up our settings control, and we can just look at our settings inside of here. Now the settings consist of 3 sections. The first section being the format, and then the project, and then the user, and then we'll talk a little bit later about site settings. So we can look at the format settings and look at all these as we go through. So let's talk really quickly about the format settings. It's kind of a little basic. There's not much to it, but it's basically when we made a project, what do we make a project? What resolution would we make the project, and what frame rate would we made the project in? So as you know, when we make a new project, we make a project that's say HD 1920 by 1080, or we make a project that's 4K, or we make some project that's different resolutions. Well, here, now that you're here, this is the default resolution for the project, but we can change this. We can change some of these settings. And so we can go from here, from a 1080 project to a 4K project. And we can go from 4K, maybe 4K full at 4096 by 2160 at this resolution here. The only limitation of this is, and this is just the way that Avid sets this up is once you make a project, you conform a project to a frame rate. So right now we're working at 1080p at 23.976 or 24 frame per second drop frame. That is the resolution that we are working at. So if you go here, you'll see that under 4K, you can choose any one of these 4K resolutions, but they're all going to be 23.976. They're all going to stay at that resolution. You can't randomly go to another frame rate. You can't go to 60 frames per second or 120 frames per second. You're always going to be at 23.976. Now, that seems like a limitation, and it kind of is, but let's be honest. You can make other projects that are whatever frame rate you want it to be, and then you can actually bring in footage from those other projects at a higher frame rate. So, there's ways around it. And so there's ways around the idea that you're stuck with this frame rate. Any resolution you want, any of these 16K, or even if you want to go to NTSC, again, it's going to be 23.976. So if it offers a 23.976, PAL doesn't, but if any of these resolutions offer a 23.976, it will do any of those in 23.976. Can you make footage inside of here at a higher frame rate? Yes. Can you bring in footage at a higher frame rate? Can you link in footage at a higher frame rate? Yes. Can you make another project that's the exact same project at another frame rate and just bounce bins back and forth between the projects? Absolutely. Avid will do it all. But it just wants the project to be known by what the frame rate of the project is. Those are your limitations there. So there's relatively little that you can do to change any of these settings. You can change the color space if you wanted to, but that's the format. That's just to change the overall format of the project. Now, next to this is the project settings. And so there are about a dozen different settings, about 10 or so, that you can adjust that are called project settings. And these are settings that are designated as project-based settings. And what I mean by that is that the project sort of decides what these settings are. These are, when I made a project called MMIC or called this project here, I made this project, this min-mail project, and I decided that this project is set at certain settings. And it doesn't matter who the user is, it doesn't matter who's on the system. These are settings that Avid has designated that they really belong to what the project is, and so what the project is set up as, and etc. So you can see some of these. We can look at, say, the audio project settings, and in the audio project settings, we can double click on this and see that it says, okay, so here's the sample rate. The sample rate is the sample rate for the project. So when it makes new media, the audio media is coming at a sample rate of 48 kilohertz. If it's the bit depth is 24-bit, you can change this, of course. You can make it 16-bit if you wanted to, or make it 44.1 or something like that. But these are settings that are set up by the project. There's input settings about how it inputs stuff in from my audio device here, and how it outputs sound in stereo or some other kind of surround sound system or whatever it may be, the hardware that it's using to bring in different stuff, etc. These are all the audio settings for the project. Now, there are also audio settings in other places, but these are the ones that are related to the project. And you'll see some other settings in here. There's not a lot of settings I really use that regularly. There's the general settings that ask you about, some of the basic defaults. We use Windows compatible file names and path, the temporary file directory where you can put temporary files. Nothing really special about this, but these are all just a dozen or so, or whatever, 10 or so projects-based settings. So they're less kind of important, I guess. I guess they're equally important, but I don't think of them that way. Now, next to here is the user settings. And this is the one I really want to get into because there's a mess of user settings. There's a ton of user settings, and there's actually these little pull downs that show you more user settings, etc. So let's look at all the user settings that exist. Now, the user profile right now is set up to new guy, and this is me. This is new guy. So I'm the new guy here, and I'm going to do my own audio settings. So let's look at all the audio settings, or look at all the new guy user profile settings, and we'll start here with audio. And we'll see. So when you're scrubbing audio, when you're playing audio back and forth, when you're scrubbing through the timeline, what is it scrubbing? What sound is it playing? That's the outgoing and incoming monitoring. So when you're in the source viewer, it's playing one frame. It's playing one frame of the clip you're rolling into. So that basically means is you're rolling into a clip this way, kind of horizontally, and you were making sound. What sound is it making? That's a little bit quiet, but you get the idea of what sound is it playing as it scrubs through. I'm holding down Shift to scrub through here, but as I hold down Shift, what frame is it playing? Well, it's playing the frame I'm arriving to, and it's playing the first frame. I could change this to longer or something. I could make this 4 frames or something like that, and then it would play this, and we'd have to do this for the timeline as well. So for the record side here, we do this, and we'd say 4 frames, and now it would play a longer section of this. So a little bit different of how this plays. Anyway, so that's there. We're going to set this back to 1, etc. Whoops, not 41. Geez, that's a lot. So this back to 1, and we'll leave this there. Default pan for mono tracks. By default, they're centered. So track 1 isn't left, track 2 isn't right, track 3 isn't left, track 4 isn't right. If you have a mono tracks, they come in they're going to output to both speakers. And so they're going to output to both speakers, etc. There's some other controls there. SEMT is probably what we want in the SEMT order. Pitch correction during shuttle. So this is off by default. And this means that when Avid works and Avid plays sound back through here, you'll see that when we play high speed, we get the high-pitched voice. We get the high-pitched kind of, faster kind of sound coming through here. So that is the audio settings. Let me turn my audio up here just a little bit, so we get a little bit more sound, so you can hear it a little bit better. But that is, here. You get the chipmunk voice. Now, old school audio people, I think they get used to, working on an open reel machine, and they get used to this sound of playing at high speed. Other systems out there, other systems like Premiere, for example, by default automatically correct for that. And they correct for that so that when they play high speed, it just sounds like it's faster. They pitch correct. And it plays like that. And so that's a little bit of difference there in that audio setting. So there's pitch correction. I prefer pitch correction off. I guess I'm old school like that. They're like so. There's some settings we can care about. Audio ducking, I don't care about. That's for if we're going to use any kind of audio ducking controls, which we can talk about at some of the time. This is how the audio ducking works. That's another feature that exists to duck music at certain places where there's a ducking control to control audio there. The bin settings I do care a lot about. So the bin settings are really interesting because here in the bin settings you have what's called the auto save interval. So Every so often, like other software, Avid will back up a copy of the bins. Remember, Avid is saving bins, so this is in a bin setting. So when you're saving stuff, you're not actually saving a project in Avid. You're saving the bins, because the bins is where you put the sequences, and that's what you want to save. You want to save the sequences, and the source clips that you use and the effects you use, everything lives in, bins up here. So you have the bins. So how often are you saving the bins? Well, by default, you're saving the bins every 15 minutes. So that's fine. But here's the other thing I like about this is that normally on other software, sometimes I'm in the middle of doing something, sometimes I'm doing something amazing. Happens to me in After Effects all the time. I'm going to play some across the screen and it's going to do something wonderfully amazing. And I'm like, oh man, this is so perfect. And then in the middle of it, it's like, hold on, let me save for you. And you're like, wait, I was in the middle of doing something. Don't save now. Or you're going to show something to a client, you hit play in the space bar and it's like, wait, pause for a second while I save. And you're like, please don't save right now. I was in the middle of showing my amazing movie there, and it's just, please don't save right now. So they offer a thing called an inactivity period. And the inactivity period says, hey, you need to be not touching this thing for 15 seconds. I'm not going to save on you for every 15 minutes. I'm going to save on you when you're not touching it. When you get up to go to the bathroom, or you get up to get a cup of coffee, or you get up to just leave, or you just sit there and think for a second. It's like, oh, you've been sitting there doing nothing for 15 seconds. All right, now I'm going to save for you. If you touch the mouse, if you touch the keyboard, I'm not going to save. But then beneath that, there's a force autosave, which I will set mine to every 60 minutes. And so here, 60 minutes, I say, I don't care. If an hour goes by and I haven't saved, man, I don't care if I'm in the middle of doing something. I don't care if the president is here and wants to go over my video edit. I'm save, just save, don't be dumb. How many copies of, how many files it lives in this thing called the attic, which is where it saves the backup bins, and then how many versions of each file. So each bin would be its own separate version, 50 of those. So it will back up 50 copies. There's some other questions in here that you can look at. There's some other fascinating things that are in there. When you create a new bin or open a bin, does it put it in tabs or does it have a floating bin? Some of those settings are there. They're perfectly good. They're wonderful. Great. Bin views. So we talked about in here different inside of like the bins. If you go into the text view, you have these different bin views: capture, custom, film, format, media tool, etc. These are these bin views, and they save as user settings. So we can talk more about bin views and changing bin views of what information is in here. And there's some controls you can do to change what the bin view shows and what columns the bin view shows. There's some capture settings if you're doing video capture, how the deck works and how it captures video files, etc. So this is if you're doing good old video tape capture, and whether it does scene extraction for DV footage. Man, whew, crazy stuff. Some of that there. There's color management settings. Now there's a setting here called Composer, and I really actually like the Composer setting. You can also get the Composer setting by right-clicking on the Composer window. And remember, if you don't know, these two windows, this space right here, the source and record monitor, they're not called the source and record monitor, they're called the Composer. So the Composer settings, you can get them here and go to Composer settings here. And the Composer settings say, hey, let's ask some questions. So there's some stuff about how the Composer setting edits and what it shows and how it works. It talks about coloring and etc. There's one in here that says, so there's some other settings here, how it moves, some of the multicam settings. But here, most importantly here, this is the one I like. Data display on top. Always display 2 rows of data. And that will give me from 1 row of data up here. It'll give me 2 rows of data. Boom. Yeah, why not? Why not give me 2 rows? Why not? Here, Composer settings, button display at bottom. Give me 2 rows of buttons. I never have a problem with more buttons. Man, 2 rows of buttons there. Amazing. Yeah, I like a lot of buttons. I like a lot of data. Give me all that stuff there, like so. The viewer. Let's see. Resize monitored image. Yeah, that's some stuff like there. Where there's masking on here, color space, etc., based on the project. Some other settings in here, but those two right there, they're really the ones that I want here. Do you have tick marks in the position bar? Yeah, you have tick marks in the position bar. Some basic stuff like there. Yeah, I don't think those things are pretty there. Anyway, so basic some composer controls. We'll talk about correction controls a little bit later. We'll start to play with a little bit of correction controls in another lesson. Deck preferences. Again, this is if we're using a video deck, and this is if we're doing some kind of video things. People are still capturing video of old archival footage and bringing it into their system. So you have some of your deck settings in there. There's the effect editor settings, some things. You can switch this between sliders and thumb wheels. You can change the text to large text. That's really nice if you're teaching. If you're teaching about effects, you can do that, etc. Update position while playing, those kind of things. Some different controls there. Anyway, there's some cool things that you have in there. Excellent, cool. So those are some settings that we have there. Now, under the export settings, you'll see that right now I have two basic export settings. I have export to Pro Tools and my default export settings of how this is going to export by default inside of here. And we can add more of these. So if you notice that these settings, there's a couple of them. There's an export and an export here. And this export, if we double click, it'll open up our export dialog box and it'll tell us what we're exporting. Well, say for example, we did this. Say for example, we haven't talked about exporting really yet, but say for example, we took this and we said duplicate this. And we're gonna make another export setting. And this export setting, we're gonna put this to something simple like QuickTime Movie, and we're gonna do it for QuickTime Movie using, let's see what kind of resolution we wanna use. We'll set this to DNX HD, or we'll set this to Apple ProRes. Sorry, Apple ProRes, and we'll set this on ProRes using Apple ProRes 422, and good old Apple ProRes 422. And this is all set up at 48 kilohertz, Rec 709. This is the setting for all the export settings. And now we can label this one ProRes export. And so now when we export, we have a preset basically of how we export it there. We kind of built this in there. And you could switch. So if you always wanted to export ProRes, you could switch to ProRes, or you could go back to standard, or you could do export to Pro Tools, which already comes factory installed for this system and how this works. So you can set up multiple export settings. You'll see this with exporting, you'll see this with importing, you'll see this with other controls that you have inside here of how it brings in different stuff and different lists of things how it works with. That's there by default. Full screen playback. This is a setting about how it plays back full screens. If it needs to reformat, it will use pillar box or pillar box or letterbox, or will it stretch to fit the screen? Some settings there. I don't really mess with these that much. Import settings again, how it imports things. Some controls about how it imports, but you can control that inside of the source browser. So if you go to source browser and you're bringing in footage, how it brings in footage and how it adjusts footage. We can talk about that maybe a little bit later and talk about that as another idea in terms there. One of the things that is really interesting, the one that really fascinates me every single time, is the interface setting. I think the interface setting is a lot of fun. I enjoy it very much. You have an interface brightness. So right now we're in super dark mode. You could go into medium mode and hit apply, and then it puts you into medium dark, or you could go into relatively lighter mode, makes it relatively lighter, or we can go super light and choose super light here, and then boom, super bright. We're gonna go to medium light here. I think for teaching purposes, I like the medium light there. And so, we have some of those controls in there. There's some other questions in here that I don't really think too much about, but there's some other things. Automatic number lock activated, etc. Windows standard alt key behavior, some basic things like there. But over here, there's a general setting, and then there's a bin settings. And here, the bin settings, the bin icon and text brightness. So this is in the bin, the icon and text brightness. So we can say the bin icon and text brightness, we can make a little bit brighter and make it a little bit more tense. We'll hit apply, and now it's a little bit lighter. Oh, that's cool. That's a little white. That's a nice little look there. Unless you want it darker, you can go super black, and then it's really black. I don't know. Kind of like the white. I don't know why. Kind of like the white. We can also do the bin highlight brightness, which is when you click on something in the bin, does it make it brighter here? We have to click out of here first, second, so we can see this really. And then we'll go here and click on a bunch of clips, and we'll grab these three here, and we'll go back to the interface settings and say the bin highlight brightness. So it'll make it really bright there, or we can make it really dark there based on, whatever we want to do. I don't know. That's kind of just nitpicky. Some people really care about this stuff, and they really like this to be a certain way. And there's a bunch of other things. Default background color for bins. By default, it's gray, and let's just say, maybe just leave it gray. Maybe just click on it and just leave it gray. But you can choose, I don't know, if you really wanted purple, you can choose purple and then apply, and then boom, new bins will be purple. And so if you were to make a new bin, Sorry, okay, boom. And then so here you could say Control N or Command N, sorry, new bin, and then make a new bin, and that new bin would be purple. These bins that have already been created by their colors, but other bins you can make them purple if you wanted to. But we don't want to do that. We're gonna leave it gray, leave it alone, leave it, I feel like I want to just click on gray and just make sure it's gray. Cool. And so my bins will be gray henceforth, etc. But the one I really care about is font size for all bin container sidebars. So this is hard to read. Font size for all bin container sidebars. We're going to say, click on this, and I'm going to change this to 18 because for teaching, which I do a lot of, I like to be able to read stuff. And when students are far away, they can't really read stuff. I mean, I can focus and do that. Default font for new bins, and we're going to say here, this is going to be 18 as well. And so we're going to make this 18 and say apply. And so there, and then override all bin font sizes. We're going to say make this 18 as well, and just make everything bigger. I mean, I guess I could make it super big, but there. And so I'm going to just override all bin font sizes. And so bin font sizes, whoops, let's turn it on. There we go. And then boom. And so my bin font sizes should be much bigger. And so I care about that kind of stuff to make my fonts bigger. I didn't make my fonts bigger. Interesting. Override. Why does it keep turning off? Cool. Must be a setting. Something weird. All right, we'll fix it. Anyway, so that is the interface settings. And then there's timeline settings. So there's different things as timeline settings. You can change the timeline brightness and the timeline and composer brightness and change the custom viewer background, etc. All these controls there. There's a whole bunch of other controls that I can adjust and set inside of there. The one that's really fascinating to me that I think is really funny is in the general settings. There's this setting here called Show Tooltips. I just want to talk about this for a second. I think this is amazing. There's one here called Show Tooltips. Now, let me explain what tooltips are. Tooltips is when you hover over a button like the play button, it tells you play. It says play right there in small little letters beneath it. And if you hover over the move a frame backward button, it gives you step backward one frame. And if you go here to the remove effect button, it gives you remove effect and it says remove effect right next to it. And that's called a tooltip, which is fine, great. But here's the weird thing. It says show tooltips and then it says delay 0.5 seconds before showing the tooltip. So somebody decided that when they hover over a button, they wanted to wait a half a second before it says what the button is. And you'll see half a second later, it'll tell me what the button is and show me what the button is. But someone wanted a control to change this to be, I don't know, slower? Yeah, they wanted to be slower and they wanted to be 2 seconds. So now when you hover over a button, now it waits 2 seconds before it tells you what the button is. You have to hover over it and then it waits 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, and then it gives you what the button is. So you could change the length of time because you want this much control. I think that's too much control. I honestly think that's silly. I like pointing that out because I think it's really ridiculous that someone really cared about how long they need to wait before telling me how long the thing is. That's ridiculous. So a couple of the settings here. We can talk about keyboard settings. This is for adjusting your keyboard and mapping buttons. So there is that control to the ability to map buttons and put buttons in new places. That's pretty standard. And so we can map buttons. We can go in here to the command palette and go to tools, command palette, that's command 3. And we could map a button to a different button. And so this is my keyboard. And so I can set this keyboard. And notice inside of here, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 keyboards. And I can clearly duplicate and make more. So I can have a keyboard here for different settings. And they've even taken the liberty of giving you, this is new in the new version, they gave a keyboard for Premiere Pro and for Resolve. And so here, if you want this to work like Premiere Pro, they gave you the closest thing to Premiere Pro that they have. So they put the, they put the lift and extract buttons here. They put the splice and overwrite buttons here. They gave you pretty much the same buttons, just in a Premiere setting. So I don't know DaVinci Resolve that well, but we can look at the DaVinci Resolve keyboard and see how that is. JKL is still there, and we still have those controls. I don't know where. Yeah, it's interesting, fascinating. So different controls you have there. You can see some of the other functions. If you hold down Shift, you can see what the Shift modifiers are on this. So you can see how the Shift modifiers, you can learn about the other keyboards. So there's keyboards for Premiere Pro, there's keyboards for Resolve. There's different keyboards that you have available, and you can map buttons and you can change and you can make your own keyboards. So you have different keyboards that are available and you can swap between keyboards for how you're feeling on whatever given day. So you can, say, oh, my Premiere buddy's coming in here. Let's switch to Premiere keyboard so he'll be happy. And then switch back to a regular keyboard. And so, that's a thing. That's a thing that works. let's see some other settings here. We can just go through some other looking settings and kind of explore some other settings here. The list tool, we'll talk about some other time. The mouse, how the mouse works. You can actually map buttons to different keys. So if you shift mouse, you can do something else. You control mouse, etc. You can map different controls to those buttons with the command palette. The vertical scroll speed, you can change, some basic functions there. Nothing special about that. Cool. One of the ones that's kind of crazy that's new, this actually used to be a project-based setting, but this is now called the sequence template setting. And the sequence template setting offers a weird question. And the weird question is the sequence template default starting time code? And I want to point this out because this is important. When we make a sequence inside of Avid, by default, having touched nothing, by default, it's giving us these tracks, 1 track of video, 2 tracks of audio, unless we add more tracks. But the default starting time code is 01000000. And for this project, for example, for this project I've been working on, in this project here, you'll notice if I back up way to the beginning here, the starting time code is 01000000. Well, already I'm an hour late, right? I'm an hour into this project. How am I an hour into this project? How does that make sense? Well, it doesn't really, but it does. And here's why it makes sense. Because in older times, when I used to work in television, video, I used to work in different areas of television, but in different video circumstances, when we worked on videotape, we might have multiple different tapes. So we'd have tape 1, tape 2, tape 3, tape 4. And, the cases were always getting mixed around in the boxes that they were in were always getting messed up. And the labels were already wrong. And so one of the things that we would do is we would label each tape with the time code. And since none of the tapes we had were longer than an hour, we'd always have these 60-minute tapes. We'd label tape 1 with hour 1. So that way, if you put it automatically into the VCR, instantaneously, it would say 0100. So you knew that when you were at 010015 or whatever, you were 15 seconds into tape 1. And so if it was 002, that would be tape 2. You could do this for TV episodes, for example. If you had TV episodes, you could put episode 1 as 01. If it was a 30-minute episode or something, you could call this 01. And then for each one, you could go to sequence template and then rechange this to 02000. And then the next sequence you made would start at 0200, so it'd be hour 2. And so that'd be a new default template there like so. And so you'd have these different sequence templates for episode 1 and episode 2, etc. And so now that we're episode 2, if I hit Command-Shift-N and make a new sequence, we'll make a new sequence. This new sequence should start at 020000, and that's how that works. So it creates this new sequence called episode 2. And so you'd have different ones for every different episode. That's just a thing you can do. Another thing you can do is here. We'll just get rid of this for a second. I don't really want this. I'm going to delete this. Let's change this one to the active one, and we'll delete this one. There we go. And so sequence template here, we're going to go here, and we're going to say, I'm going to start my time code here. I'll change it to 592000. That's a weird time code. And a weird time code. This will be a little thing. We'll save this one as default template too. And so now when I make a new sequence, Command-Shift-N, make a new sequence, it's going to start my sequence at 592000. Man, why would we do that? It's a crazy number there. 592000. This is an old school trick. Old school trick is you change your default time code to 592000 because what happens is you throw in 30 seconds of color bars, right? 30 seconds, you're going to begin your sequence with 30 seconds of color bars. This is for broadcast. You're going to throw in a 30-second slate of color bars at the beginning, and you're going to set this at 592000. Great, awesome, amazing. Well, that's 30 seconds of color bars. That's going to bring us to 5920 to 5950. And then you're going to throw in 10 seconds of black. 30 seconds of bars, 10 seconds of black. Standard 5920 to 5950, 5950 to 1 hour. So you add your color bars in, you add your black in. Next thing you know, guess what? You are at officially 1 hour. So you can kind of back time in the color bars in black, or if you have a minute of color bars, or whatever your standards are for the organization you're working for, or for the broadcast station you're working for, set up a pre-slate so you have some runway basically to go into that. So you can set up that time code there. That's just another way of doing it. By default, we're going to stick here to sequence template at 1 hour even, and that's the way it's going to be unless you go ahead and change it. If you want it to be all zeros, you know, in Premiere and other systems, it's all zeros. If you want it to be all zeros, cool, make it all zeros. Go for it. That's there. So you have that option as well. But that's new. That's a sequence template. That used to be in the general settings, in the project settings. It is not there anymore. I was looking for it the other day and I just couldn't find it. It was in here in sequence template. It's now a user setting. So it's now been integrated with the user, which I kind of like better actually. Let's take a look. Other settings that we have here, the source browser. Let's see the source browser. All source browser settings can be accessed through the source browser window. Well, yeah, okay, that clearly makes sense. Why there's a setting there doesn't make sense, but that's fine. The timecode window, that's if you bring up your tools timecode window, and so you can have your big timecode window of how this is set. So there's some settings here of how the timecode window looks. This is a separate window you can bring up. I like to make it really big so you have it there. This is sometimes great for clients. If you have a client come in and they really want to see the timecode in the display, you can, you know, kind of sandwich this somewhere in the bottom of the window here and just have this like time code. Cool. So you can really read the time code. You know exactly what the time code is. And then someone's like, why is this have this 5920? This is really crazy. Anyway, but you can have the time code there so they can read it. So let's see in the time code window, what settings do we have here? Oh, that just brings up the time code window. Yeah, fascinating. Again, not much to go on there. So we'll close it out there. Yeah. The timeline settings, these are important settings. So let's talk about timeline settings. We'll spend a little bit of time on the timeline settings. We'll go kind of deep into them here. So timeline settings. Okay, show the toolbar, sure. Let's show the toolbar. Great, that makes sense, yes. I don't know why you wouldn't show the toolbar. That's really bizarre. Why would you turn that off? Show marked regions. That means when you're adding mark in and mark out points. So here, if you're adding mark in and mark points, are you showing this markings? Yes. Are we showing that there's a marked section here? Absolutely. So if we have track selectors on, yeah, show marked regions. Show marked waveforms. Sometimes people turn this on and it makes me a little kooky. I don't prefer this. So if you have waveforms on, so if you have your waveforms on and you're showing your waveforms, it'll only show the waveforms over the areas that's marked. So if you have a mark in and out point, that's where it's showing the waveforms. If you don't have that on, it'll show the waveforms all over the whole thing. I guess that's cool if you want to save some time so it doesn't have to regenerate the waveforms, etc., etc. Double clicking to show nesting, that's there. Highlight suggested render areas after playback. Yeah, sure, do that. Sequence mapping, opening sequence map as overlays on timeline. I'm not a fan of the sequence map to begin with. That's in the fast menu, the sequence map. I'm not a big fan of it to begin with, so we're gonna ignore the sequence map there. Display effects, yeah, I think so. I think display effects is pretty much, we should show that there are effects in the timeline, etc. Display during segment drag. So when we're moving segments around, what is it showing? Right now, it's set to nothing, which means if I go here and I say, let's move these clips around like this, it doesn't show anything. Here, it doesn't really show me nothing going on here. We can go here and set this to, sorry, let me just reset this. We can go to timeline and say, hey, show me the 4 frame during segment drag, and say here, 4 frame. Now we do segment drag, it shows me this weird 4 frame of where it's dragging this to and how it's dragging this and what it's moving it to. And so it shows me the beginning and after of this edit of what's happening there. So that's kind of cool. I think we want that. Movement during play. This is a thing that it will, if you're zoomed in super close, will it go page by page or will it scroll? So you have this option here. Sorry, we have to keep copying out of here. Let's go to page. And so if you're zoomed in super close and you get to the end of the segment here, you come to the end of the segment, will it page over, new page, you know, young men together for the new page, or does it do scrolling, which is a nice little feature. I like scrolling. So now when you play this, it scrolls the timeline past you. It's kind of cool. If you like that kind of thing, not really important, but there, etc. Timeline text color. Is it white text? Is it black text? Is it white and black text? White and black timeline text depends on what the brightness is. So it's kind of working with the brightness there. There's a separate section here in the timeline controls called the edit controls, and the edit controls offer some options here, and these are really kind of important. So let's talk about these kind of circumstances. Auto patching. So auto patching is on and auto monitoring is on. Let's talk about both of these settings here. So auto patching and auto monitoring means this. If I have video 1 on and video 2 off. If I turn video 1 on, this guy here, the source video, is desperately trying to find where to feed this video over. So if I have some kind of video in here, we grab in some B-roll here of just something, and I have some B-roll here, and it says, hey, I want to put this B-roll somewhere. So if I turn video 1 on, it's like, oh, can I put on video 2? Oh, cool. And if I turn video 2 off and have video 1 on, it jumps. So it just jumps for me. It jumps to the next available track that's there. If you want that, if you want this to always be jumping for you without you having to drag up to pull it to a different track, it just jumps to the track that's on. So even if you have like, you know, a dozen tracks here, and you say, oh, I don't have this track on, I don't have this track on, I don't have this track on, this track on, but I turn this one off, it's going to jump to the next up track that exists. So that is called auto patching. Auto monitoring means that right now I have this set up so that the monitor is on video 3. So again, if I have a bunch of tracks, it's going to say if I go to video 5, it's going to go to video 5, and the monitor here turns on and turns off, turns video 5. So this will show me video track 5, video 4, video 3, video 2, video 1, show me all these tracks down the whole list. If I go to 7, it's going to jump to 7. But here's the problem with this. If I go to video 1, it's going to jump down and show me the monitor on video 1, which means it's not going to show me these other tracks. It's not going to show me these other tracks. I sometimes don't want that. I sometimes don't want the auto monitoring on. I prefer to just leave my monitor on the uppermost track. Hey, if I have video on video track 8, show me 8. If I have video track on video track 7, show me 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. If I have 4, show me 4, 3, 2, 1. Just show me everything down. It's going to show me from the top down. Stop moving this. I don't need you to move this thing every time it moves a track, because that's kind of wasteful to me. So not a fan, not a big fan. Cool. Segment drag snap, so it will snap when dragging segments. You can do this yourself by holding the command key. I prefer to hold in the command key and do it myself, but you can do this there. Default sync locks on. This is a Premiere thing. So we talked about sync locks, the idea that you can lock these tracks so that it'll prevent you from accidentally breaking sync. If you want those to be on all the time, default sync locks on. You know, allow you to do that. Some other controls there, select filler with segment tools. That says that you can use this to grab a different piece of blank space here. So if you have a blank piece of blank space, you can go here with the segment tools and you can grab blank space. That's not bad. That's a cool thing. I think that's good. I don't know why you'd want to turn that off, etc. Some of the controls. There's a thing here that says start filler duration, and this is set to 30 seconds. I usually set this to like 10. And this is if, whoops, not 1 minute. Geez, way too much. Let's set this to 10:00. Cool. All right, let's set this to 00:00:10:00. Cool. So that's gonna be 10 seconds. And then what that'll do is if I go here and I right click and say add filler, where is it? Add filler at start, it's gonna add 10 seconds of filler. Immediately, automatically I have 10 seconds of black. That's not bad, that's kind of cool. And so I have that. And so I have some of those controls there. Lassoing transitions enters trim mode. Sure, when I drag a lasso around a transition, I can go to trim mode. The default segment tool is overwrite right now. I actually prefer it to be insert. So normally if I don't know what I'm doing with my segment tool, it's going to do insert by default. So when I move clips in, it does there like so. I actually prefer only one segment tool can be enabled at a time. So if you're using segment tools, you can have them both on and have both those tools. Now I can only click one or the other. So I can only click the yellow guy or the red guy. I can't do that double guy. That double guy is weird to me. It's just too much power, too much luxury. I can't deal with it. So there's some settings there, etc. And then I don't know, there's some other settings here. There's workspace views. So change your workspace views for different workspaces, etc. There is the trim settings. The trim settings I care about a lot because the trim settings offer the pre-roll and the post-roll, which you can control in the trim window as well, which you don't really need to control ahead of time. But here, under features, never use small trim window, that's fine. JKL trim. This one, some people really like JKL trimming. Some people like the idea that if I go here to the cut point and I go to trim, sorry, let me go into just single roll or ripple trim. If I go here, they like the idea that I could grab this clip, and when I hit JKL, I could trim more on or trim more off. Just by doing JKL. That's a cool way to trim for them. It's not. Because 9 times out of 10, what I end up doing is I end up hitting L to play. I think, okay, I like that edit. Let's take a look. And I go to play, and I don't realize I'm in trim mode. And next thing you know, I just added
to have them become familiar with
10 seconds onto my sequence because I wasn't paying attention to what I was doing. And so I turn that off. It just gets in the way. It messes me up. I'm not smart like that. And so here, I'm going to turn that off and have that setting there. And so I have those settings. Those are going to be my settings there. And those are my user profile settings. So I can take those settings and I can say, hey, let's take these settings. And now this is my user profile. And I can go to user profile up here to the menu. Under menu here, I can go to create a new user profile, which I don't want to do. I can import a user profile, or I can export a user or user profile. And so I'm going to export this user profile and say export. And it asks me different ways to export it here. So it's going to ask me first where to export it to. So under location, I'm going to export it right now. Just for now, I'm going to export the desktop. Is that a great place to export it? No, but I'm going to export the desktop. Just, believe in me here. So I'm going to export to desktop and say, cool, export desktop. And it offers me to export it as a personal auto load and auto save, a group auto load and auto save. I prefer to export it as a standard and a local user profile standard. And the reason I prefer that is because, I don't know, because I'm weird, because I like to have it to myself. It's just mine. I don't like to put it into a group. I don't like to have it being automatically updated every single time. I just want to have a copy of it. I just want to have a copy of it for myself. And we're going to hit OK in standard, and it's going to export it to the desktop. And if you go here onto the desktop and you look here onto the desktop, let me close that for a second. Let me close that for a second. We're going to go here to the desktop and see somewhere in here, we will have new guy. And here, right here is new guy. And new guy is my user setting that looks like there. And so inside here, there's a settings file and an AVE file. And there's my stuff. And so that's there. I have that setting living inside of there. And so I can put that into a thumb drive, I can put that into a hard drive, I can put that anywhere I want to, and I can bring that back in and have that setting for me as I need it, however I want to work. Cool, the setting is there, etc. And so I have all that good stuff, however I want. And so those are my settings. Now, the last category is the site settings. And the site settings are strange. So we had project settings. Project settings were related to me. They were my settings that were associated with me as the, not even associated with me, associated with the project. So they're set with me, with the project as the project is. Then they have the user settings. Let me correct myself. The user settings that are associated with me, the user, new guy. And so the new guy settings versus the project settings, we had those. The last category we have is kind of weird, and there's not a lot of settings here. These are what are called site settings. These are how the computer system operates. These are settings I don't really have much control over, or I don't really want to have much control over. So back in the day, it used to be really important about the deck configuration control. And the deck configuration control was how the VCR that's connected to this Avid system was connected, what it was using, whether it was using FireWire or whether it was using some kind of interface or some kind of LAN interface or whatever it may be. How was it connected to the system physically? It didn't matter what project it was working on. It didn't matter who the user was. It didn't matter any of that stuff. It just mattered that this was the workstation I was at, and this is how the workstation is set up. So those kind of settings, like there, how the video satellite is set up, how the communication serial ports are connected, these settings, I don't really mess with. I don't really touch these settings. I never even looked at the video satellite settings. Oh, look at that, the TCP UDP port for the satellite. Oh man, this is fascinating. Video satellite, I don't even know what that means. Craziness. There's all kinds of things you can set up. And this is kind of like really under the hood kind of stuff of really setting up how the system works and what the system does in terms of settings. Those are the ones that are just there. So those are site settings there. Now, why do I show you site settings and why do we talk about site settings? Because there's a trick that you can do. You can go here, and if you're ever in here and you're looking at a bin, if you're in here in bin view, you close your settings and you're in bin view, you'll see that up here it says file, and then we'll give you file open bin. And this is, of course, how you would bring in a bin from another project, how you'd import a bin. Of course, that makes total sense that you do that here. But if you do the settings file, again, Command Shift equal or Control Shift equal on a PC, you go to settings and the settings window is open. Now everything changes and you can go to file, open settings file. So you can actually open settings from other people's settings. So if you were working with a different user, you could open up somebody else's user settings. So you could go to open settings file, and we can go here and we can go to different settings files here. And there's different setting files that you have available here. And so you can go to desktop here and go and look for whatever it was, new guy, and go to new guy and bring in new guy's settings, and you could bring in new guy's settings XML, and then you could copy over new guy's XML settings and have those kind of set up in there. So inside of here is all the settings from new guy. Now I'm already new guy, so bringing settings for myself and myself wouldn't make sense. Let's not open those settings. We don't care about them there. But here's the thing I do care about. If we go here to go to file, open settings file. Instead of looking for new guy here, we go to the default Avid Media Composer settings file. You will see a folder here called site settings. And under site settings, you can put site settings and you can open up the site settings window. And right here in the site settings, there's nothing. And that's because these settings here are by default automatically set up that way. You can't touch them. You can't mess with them. They are there automatically. But what you can do is you can be in super control. And by in super control, what you can do is you can go to user settings and say, hey, I want everybody. I want everybody. I don't care who the user is. I don't care what the project is. I want everybody to use the same, I don't know, the same interface. That'd be crazy. Just force everybody to use the same interface settings. So everyone has to have their interface brightened. I'm in control. I'm the CEO of this company, and I want everybody, or I'm the engineer of this company, and I want everybody to have the same keyboard settings because they're going to use the same keyboard setting as me. That's going to be across the board. So every new project they make, they have to use mine. They have to use my keyboard. I don't care if they're a user. I don't care if they're a project. This computer system, everybody uses my keyboard. And you can click and drag and pull the keyboard setting into there and put the keyboard setting into there. And now that, and close that out, boom, and that becomes a site setting. It won't show up here, but it will be a site setting so that everybody is set up the same exact way as you. And so you force everybody to have the same site settings as you. So if there's something that you really want to control that you say, oh man, I don't want anybody using sync locks. Sync locks are the devil, and I don't want to use anybody using sync locks. You could set up the timeline to not use sync locks, or set up the timeline to always use sync locks. I don't know, something that you want to have special control over, that everyone who hops into this computer has to use this thing. Save it as a site setting. Open the site settings file, drag over the site setting, and save it as a site setting, and now everyone's stuck with it. Theoretically, they can go back and change it if they went back and changed the site setting, but you know, they're stuck with it in there, and that's, you know, that's what it is. There's ways around that. Obviously, you can duplicate settings and make your own copy of settings, but by default, that's going to be, hey, I have a bunch of junior editors working in this company, and they shouldn't be touching any of this, and they don't know how to set everything up, and they don't know to set everything to change it every way, and they all want their own user profile. Great, let them have their own user profile, make what they want, but everyone who works at this company is going to be doing this exact way and working with settings that way. And so those are some of the settings. Those are some of the settings I like, and those are some settings you can use. And those are some, you know, fun exploration into settings. It's not much more than that. You know, there's settings that you're going to encounter. There's settings that I still haven't encountered that I'm going to one day be like, oh, no, that would totally be helpful. Yeah, totally. There's a lot of settings in here, and there's a lot more, you know, hidden things in here that you're going to discover that just make your life a little bit easier to work with. You know, if you have the time, get used to them and use them frequently. My one bit of advice, though, and from what I've read and from what I've heard, is that if you upgrade to a different version, to a major upgrade of Avid, so if you're in Avid 18 and you're going to Avid, you know, the new 2023 version or whatever it may be, and you're going to the latest version of Avid, you know, this right here is Avid Media Composer. Here, Ultimate, this is 2022 version 12. If you go to 2021, if you change years, basically, you might want to redo your user settings. Because if they do a major overhaul of the software and they do a bunch of big changes, some of those settings just do not, you know, mesh well with how it is now. You know, if you're wearing clothes from, you know, 20 years ago and you're still, you know, walking around the streets today, people may laugh at you. The system may not like it so much if you change it. Like, so every so often, take a Friday when you're not doing a lot of stuff and just go through your user settings and just redo them all and just check them and save them again. So if you do have a settings file that is outdated, let's say outdated, and it just doesn't work anymore, new versions, maybe you should just go ahead and make a brand new setting file. Anyway, that's a little bit about settings, and you know, that's some stuff we can do. We'll get into some more crazy effects driven stuff later on, and we'll play some more with Avid and some other software. Anyway, that's about it.